Hi, today's video is a little bit weird, I'll warn you. It's a kitchen video, so if you're not interested in these kinds of things, just wait on the next one. What I'm doing today is going to be demonstrating how to use a cheap cut of meat, like a cheap roast, the ones that go and sell really cheap, and cut those up for applications like beef stew or maybe beef fajitas or various things where you need beef pieces and bites. It's going to be up to you and how you want to cut thin or thick and so forth, but I'm going to show you what I do. And the reason I decided to do this video was because when I was first married, it's one of the things I didn't really do. I didn't think about doing it until eventually a few years later someone suggested it, and I'm like, oh, that's a brilliant idea. Why didn't I think of that? So I just thought I would do the video in case some of you haven't thought of it. What I did is last week I seen in going through the weekly sales ads of my grocery stores, Save-A-Lot was having a great sale on roast beef, and I haven't seen roast beef drop that low since last fall. They were having some of the cheap roast cuts for $2.99 a pound. That is an outstanding beef price. So I went and I bought as many as I could find, and I'll talk about that in the video. I actually did this a couple days ago, the video that I'm going to cut to in a minute. It was on Saturday. Today is Monday when I'm filming. You'll probably see this on a different day. But anyway, it was a couple days ago, so I don't remember all I said as I was, cutting up the meat. Anyway, I got this meat, got an outstanding deal, and I was thrilled. But as I was cutting, I had like 6 or 7 roasts to go through, and got kind of near the end of it, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to film this just in case someone has not thought about this, and also in case they're intimidated on how to chop up a roast. I mean, honestly, I really don't think it's very hard, so it may not be anything like life-shaking or anything to y'all, but for better or worse, I show you what I do and what works for me. Maybe it'll help you, maybe not, but have at it. I will go through and cut to the video here in just a second, so enjoy. Have a blessed day. All right, we have a package here of cheap roast, and we are going to cut this up. Hopefully you guys can see. This really does save a lot of money. Let me lay that offside. Okay, so what I do, and I am no butcher, but this has worked for years. What I do is I'll see how the grain of the meat's running, and this way it's kind of up and down. So I'll start making cuts with that grain. Now I know that sounds opposite of what you've been told, but bear with me. A good sharp knife helps. I usually, if I'm going to do a lot of this, I make it a point to sharpen my knife beforehand. And I did do that today, so that helps a lot. Otherwise you have to use a lot more pressure, and then you end up with a risk of cutting yourself. Okay, that's the inside and the top. Pay attention to that and I'll show you why. My goal was to get this into bite-sized pieces that aren't as tough as shoe leather. Because, who wants to eat shoe leather, right? Okay. Now that we got these, I lay these with the inside up. And then I cut them in half again. And again, the grain of the meat is kind of running this way. I don't know if you can see it in the camera, probably not. Now there's some spots like right here it's not quite, and with these cheap cut roasts, that's kind of what you're going to find, that it's a little bit different directions. Just kind of go with what most of the roast is, and then you'll be doing fine. So inside's up now. I'm going to cut them again. Quite often you have to have a second swipe when they're really thick. That got through. Be very careful of your fingers, of course. Meat, I think, is something you can cut your fingers on a little easier when you're working with it because it's so slippery, of course. You gotta keep your fingers curled in. Now those fat pieces, I'll deal with those in a second because, well, I am not against eating fat. I don't really want it on this particular type just because it gets tough. And I'll trim, like over here is my pile of trimmings, and I'll save those, and even if I don't want them, oops, that went flying. Even if I don't want them right now, like to do broth, then I'll just throw them in a baggie in the freezer. Now, if I do have those little pieces like that, I just nip off those ends, and those can be for a soup pot. Now, one little tip you can do is you can put this whole plastic cutting board, if you have one, down inside of a metal pan. Normally I do, just so juices don't run everywhere. I didn't do it today because my other ones are in use with other meat, because I bought so much meat at the store today. It was such a good deal. So kind of time to trim off those little bits. And now you can trim it before you start cutting, but sometimes it gets awkward because, again, the fat and gristle is never really on the same spots with these cheap cuts. But I'm laying my strips out one at a time. All those little fat and tough pieces off. Now, if you ate this like this, with the grain of the meat running this way in these big long strips, it would be so terribly tough. You do not want it that way. At least I don't. But we're going to make it to where it'll cook up a lot more tender. And even if you do have a tough cut, cooking a little extra, like if you're doing a pot of stew or something like that, give it extra time to cook, and that will break down the structures in the meat. Now, you can do this all in one pile and cut through, but it's a little easier if you separate it into two, depending on the size of the roast you're working with. And then I start coming through here, and I cut in groups, because otherwise it'll take you forever. That's why I like big knives and cutting boards. This knife was an investment. I've had it for years. It's a Wusthof, I think that's how you say that. It's a Sanctu or what have you. I've linked to it before below in the description for kitchen stuff. I won't lie, it's expensive, but I've had it now for 15, 18 years, something like that, and I will probably have it the rest of my life. It was an $80 knife. I know that's really high, but I think an investment in good knives is important, especially when you're doing stuff like this. I have a few good ones, and hopefully I don't ever have to buy anymore, but hopefully you can see you're getting bite-sized pieces like this. And the way the grain is now, because you're cutting against the grain finally for the last cut, that should be a very tender piece of meat when you go to eat it. All in all, this is a good method to save a lot of money. Today these roasts were $2.99 a pound. I have not seen beef that cheap in months. It was last fall that I seen it this cheap, and I did the same thing last fall. And I'm just putting in this big old cake pan here and then I'll bag it all up. I do have a food saver. I might run the food saver, but honestly we go through enough meat that I probably don't have to. Just putting it in a bag's good, or in plastic containers if you don't like using bags or whatever. We have a lot of plastic containers that we bought to not use so many bags. I think I have those in my kitchen links too. I learned about those from watching Amy Marion. She does a lot of pre-cooking, and I absolutely love those plastic containers. I use so many less bags. I hate disposable stuff if it's not necessary. I will say, if you're putting a lot of meat in your freezer and space is low, bags usually do work a little bit better for space reasons, which is the main reason I'm using them today. I want stuff to fit okay. But generally, if you use those plastic containers, you can wash and reuse for a long time, and it saves money too. And of course, the whole topic of this video is saving money. I like to save money. When I was in the store today, they were out of this meat, and I happened to ask the lady, I don't want my tower of meat here to fall. I asked the lady, I said, do you guys have any more of that in the back that you advertised? And she said, oh yes, we just haven't put it out yet. She said, if you can wait, I will cut you some. And I'm like, gladly. She became my hero because she went back. It took like 25 minutes for her to go cut, but she brought me out a bunch of these and let me pick from what I wanted. And I think I bought 6 of these, and as you can see, this is the pile of meat that I've cut, and this is the last one I have to cut. Doesn't count burger deals and a deal I got on chicken today too. I found chicken for $1 a pound, chicken breast, boneless, skinless. Of course I buy chicken thighs and stuff like that too. It's the cheapest cut usually, but my husband and I do like chicken breast, and that is nice to have. $1 a pound, you cannot beat that. And it was all fine. I'm just bagging up the individual pieces. Now this piece is like tricky. It's thin enough to not be stable to cut, but it still has that big layer of fat on it, and that is kind of like fat and silver skin, and it is very, very tough. So I'm going to come back to that in a minute. Now this roast is a little different. The grain is more up and down, and I'm going to cut it in a very similar way. Honestly, it's going to come out, by the time I make all those cross cuts, it's going to come out nice and tender anyway. These will be tender just about no matter how you cut it, but when the grain is really long ways, those won't be, so you have to be careful in how you cut it. And this is really simple. Most of you probably know how to do this. I figured I would do this video so one day my kids could look back at it or something. Now right there, the grain's kind of running this way. That one might be a little more chewy, but again, once you get it all cut up, it's going to be good. I've used this method for years, and then this kind of really usually works out and takes really tough meat, and it's pretty tasty. I haven't had complaints, and neither has my husband. And it sure is hard to beat. $2.99 a pound for perfectly good beef. And having it pre-cut like this, gosh, you can use it in so many applications. I won't lay that there for the moment. Make your piles of what you think you can get your knife through. Earlier, I got my knife through an entire one, but it was a little trickier. I'll lay this aside. Hopefully I'm not whacking my microphone as I do this. And just start with the end and try to hold it down. Watch your fingers. That little part wants to wiggle. Right there is a piece I really don't want on there.